Thanks very much, Miriam, and thanks everyone for coming. I think obviously there's always an interest in what's happening in US politics here in Ireland because we hear so much about it. And with the midterms in just a few days, there's obviously a lot of news about what's going on in the US. So where I was, I had the pleasure of being invited to speak in Rhode Island by a feminist bookshop called The Collective, and it's based in kind of a smaller town in Rhode Island, which is the smallest state, and it's near Boston and places like that, but it's like a tiny little state, so it felt quite like Ireland actually. And it was really interesting. I met some incredible activists there doing some amazing work, so I'm going to share some of what I learned and what I saw while I was there. The feminist and the women's movement in the US has shown enormous potential. I'm sure people remember when Trump was inaugurated, millions took to the streets. The women's marches were these colossal shows of anger and opposition to what Trump stood for and his election. Like 750,000 people on the streets of LA. These were mega protests. I met lots of activists who had gone to DC or gone to Boston or gone to New York for those protests, and they said the atmosphere was electric. Just this communal sense of a movement coming together, which really shows you the potential that there is there to build a fight back against the enormous attacks that are coming down the line. So where I was staying in Rhode Island, there were actually loads of different groups that I got to meet up with, and it was very interesting to see the different approaches being taken. The first event that I went to was organised by the Woman Project. They took out a 2-page full-colour ad in the newspaper to build for this meeting. They had hundreds of women send in that they wanted their signature as part of this ad, that they were calling for Roe v. Wade to be put in the state law, essentially for abortion rights not just to be on the basis of the Supreme Court decision decades ago, but to be in Rhode Island state law. And it was very interesting to see the collection of speakers. They kind of did a bit of a tour of history. So they had loads of different speakers from what it was like before Roe, what it was like kind of winning Roe and establishing abortion rights for the first time across the US, and what it could be like after Roe if Kavanaugh's appointment and the way the Supreme Court is going results in the federal protection for abortion access to be overturned. So it was fascinating. It was certainly very, very different to what our meetings in Ireland are like, to have doctors, lawyers, and many religious people, like reverends, who have been part of providing abortion services for decades. It was very different to what our experience is like here. And the meeting was actually in a Unitarian church. So I've never gone to a pro-choice meeting where so many people said that God guided them in their pro-choice politics. But it was nice to see this kind of different approaches, and that there actually is such a wealth of experience there from the struggles that were waged to win these rights decades ago. And it's interesting because a layer of stories, a section of the meeting was about people's personal stories. So people stood up at the end and shared personal experiences of accessing abortion or different reproductive health issues. But a number of people told stories about their mothers, about their grandmothers, about their aunts, etc. And it's not that long ago that abortion was illegal in Rhode Island and many other states, and obviously it was illegal everywhere before that. So it was interesting to hear. It was very much understood if the legal protection disappears, what will happen is people accessing the services through a handful of doctors that'll be willing to provide it illegally, extremely expensively, and that people's health will be put in danger. So it was interesting to kind of hear those living history in the room, and there was very much an understanding of how serious this is and how necessary it is to ensure that abortion rights are protected. It's interesting in the US sometimes there is an interpretation that abortion rights were won through the court, but it was clear in the room the level of activism, the enormous women's movements of decades past, the impact that they had, the attitudes that were transformed on that basis, and the enormous pressure that was put on the political establishment in the past. That is the context of getting Roe v. Wade passed. That is the context of how abortion rights have been won all over the world. And obviously we know in Ireland, it was our movement that forced the political establishment to call the referendum. Many people were sharing with me statistics about how many people in Rhode Island support abortion rights, and the figures are huge. They're very, very high. They're very similar to our statistics of the opinion polls that we had that I shared while I was there, and people were really interested in the idea that while people might answer less highly in favour of abortion rights when they're directly asked, do you think abortion is right, or some kind of weird blunt question like that, that actually if you ask people, would you believe a woman who said she needed an abortion, they say yes. And they're interested in that kind of approach. And what they're essentially trying to do in Rhode Island is put the fact that the majority of people support abortion rights into play in terms of a movement and into play in terms of what the law would be. And that's the struggle that they're fighting at the moment. It's interesting because the state is actually majority Democratic. There are only a handful of Republicans elected, and yet they have never been able to get the Reproductive Health Care Act, so abortion rights in the state law, onto the floor for a debate even. They've been able to have like kind of pre-hearings and things like that, and never been able to bring it forward. So I think it was well understood, the idea that really developing a movement, building a movement to put pressure on them is the only way to do it. Just getting more Democrats elected or something like that isn't going to solve the problem, because there are plenty of Democrats elected locally already and they have no interest in doing anything about it. Even the Republicans who are running in, many of the Republicans who are running in the election that's happening at the moment say that they are pro-choice. So like, this is not a controversial issue in Rhode Island, and yet they've never even been able to get it to the floor for a debate. So some of what I heard from the different speakers at that event and from some of the other meetings I was at was sort of a fascinating insight into this politicisation that's happening, where people are unbelievably disgusted at Trump, what he stands for, what he's doing, every announcement that he makes, everything he says. They're horrified at the layer that are unfortunately echoing what he's calling for in society, and they're trying to, build solidarity to oppose that. And I saw some excellent initiatives that were specifically, Rhode Island is the whitest part of the US, is the least proportionate number of people of colour in the population, and specific initiatives to try and build like anti-racist solidarity amongst white people and things like that. Like really good initiatives trying to build solidarity. And there's an understanding that actually you need to get the collective, that you need to mobilise the power of people to challenge these institutions. It's interesting with Kavanaugh's confirmation, people were so disgusted. It is very clear. It was very clear to me that it wasn't sort of one or two of the activists I met. It was all the different activists I met, all the different people I met, including people in shops and cafes were asking like, why are you here? I'd explain something. If a call had been put up, if there was a clear leadership saying, we need another women's march now in opposition to Kavanaugh, there would have been a massive response. It's clear that the potential for a movement that could not just take on the attacks that are coming against Roe v. Wade, but take on the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of anti-abortion laws that have been passed since Roe and defeat them, is huge. And if that could be organised in and put into effect in a way, then you could not only protect Roe v. Wade, but you could in fact dramatically improve the situation in terms of abortion laws and abortion access in the US. So since Roe, the Supreme Court has discussed abortion many times, because there keep being these attacks from the right. And they have basically now fallen to such a limited position that, number one, the Hyde Amendment means no federal money, so public money, no tax money can be spent on abortion. So obviously that means abortion is extremely expensive in a country where healthcare is unbelievably inaccessible. The stories that I heard were harrowing. While I was there, a story broke about a particular factory in Memphis, Tennessee, where women who were pregnant, who were working in this mobile phone warehouse, distribution centre warehouse place, had brought in doctor's notes saying, I can't do this heavy lifting work, I can't be lifting these heavy boxes because of my pregnancy. and were forced to continue to work. If they had walked out of work, not only would they lose their paycheck, which obviously is completely unacceptable to people, but more importantly, they'd lose their limited health insurance that they got through their job. To have a baby without health insurance in the US is an astronomical and impossible feat. To pay the fees, like I'm sure people saw about a year ago, I think, where there was that scandal of a woman being charged, I think it was a couple $100 to hold her baby. It was a specific baby holding fee because she had just had a cesarean section, so kind of a nurse needs to be there to assist her in case, because she has a lot of medication in her system, etc. She's very tired and all of that, but like a specific fee, hundreds of dollars to be able to hold your own baby. This is healthcare in the United States, in the belly of the beast, where capitalism is able to get away with so much, and where they have so effectively and unfortunately weakened the workers' movement, the trade union movement and the women's movement that would oppose these things. So this story broke that multiple women had doctor's notes saying, don't make me do this or I might have a miscarriage, and had miscarriages because they were forced to do that work. And the response from the company was, this is being whipped up by the Teamsters because they're trying to unionise, as opposed to, we're sorry we forced you to work to have miscarriages. That wasn't their response at all. So the brazenness of these people is so obvious and so disgusting and blatant. It's actually obvious that you could mobilise huge numbers of people to oppose that, Think of what ordinary people's response to that would be. Horror, obviously. So the potential to build a movement in opposition to these bosses, in opposition to these conservative legislators, is enormous. So it was really inspiring to see loads of different groups that are campaigning and that are building on different issues. But it was clear there isn't a leadership, there isn't the necessary drive as to what the plan is and how abortion rights can be protected, but also other key issues can be fought on. There are some really, really incredible pro-choice organisations in the US. Sorry, my whole plan is failing here. So I met with activists from Planned Parenthood who are, under extreme attack from the right in the US. Unbelievable stuff. They are frequently threatened with violence. They are being systemically attacked in terms of legislation, investigations into them, attacks on their funding, even though the only state money they get is for things like testing and for looking, mammograms and cervical check and that kind of thing. They don't get any state money for anything to do with abortion, and yet there's this complete attack on them. So it was really interesting to meet with some of their activists. Their slogan is care no matter what, which is that they will never judge somebody for whatever choice that they're making, and they'll try to provide the best care that they can. But another slogan that some of their clinics use, particularly in the areas where they're under threat, and literally some of their doctors will be wearing bulletproof vests and things like that, is these doors stay open. Their clinics are trying not to be intimidated, they're trying not to be given to these attacks and to be shut down. But obviously, it's not enough to be in a defensive position where you're trying to hold a small number of clinics. If you look at Texas, which is an enormous state, recent attacks have led to, I think it was 5 clinics shutting, and now they only have about 7 across the state. So it's a huge burden is being placed on people. This map, which I don't think you can properly see, but it highlights this is a report by the Centre for Reproductive Rights, the states in which abortion will almost certainly be illegal if Roe is overturned. It's most of the middle of the country, most of the south, and parts of the north as well. So Rhode Island is there because it's not in the state law. Now, because of the makeup of the state, it could be put in the state law relatively easily, but there's no movement to do that from within the political establishment. So this is a huge threat. Millions and millions and millions of people who need access to abortion services could be cut off from safe access if this happens. And the threat is there, and there's a really good documentary that Netflix have just put up recently, which is basically like what happened around Roe and what has happened since then, and it paints a very clear picture, which is the other side are so extremely well organised that they've gotten hundreds of anti-abortion laws passed in the decades since Roe. Sorry, this seems to be having a bit of feedback. They seem to have had plenty of time to talk to Irish anti-abortion TDs and hand them language to insert into, to propose as amendments to our new abortion law. They're talking about people being forced to watch DVDs that would lie to you and tell you you can reverse a medical abortion, which is an obsession of theirs. They're really, really into this. It's a bit strange given that it's completely not true, but there are a huge number of videos on YouTube telling you, oh, you can reverse, your medical abortion. You can go to a pro-life doctor and they'll help you reverse your medical abortion. Not true at all. And they propagate these lies all the time. They're obsessed with telling lies about medical abortion because their general tactic has been shut down clinics. If we can't get Roe overturned overall, limit access, limit access, limit access. If you physically can't get somewhere and you can't access the service, then fewer abortions will happen. That has been their tactic. But with the medical abortion, you don't actually really need to be in a clinic. Now, in many state laws, you do, under law, have to be in a clinic to be given the pills, but you don't need that service to use them. You can very safely use medical abortion at home. So they, instead of attacking access to medical abortion because it's so easy to provide mass access to medical abortion, they spread lies and misinformation about it. They want people to be afraid of it. They want people to think it's reversible. They want people to think all kinds of nonsense about it. So they spread these lies because you don't need a clinic to use abortion pills at home. Since April of this year, a new service called aidaccess.org, which is founded by Rebecca Gompertz, who runs womenonweb.org, who obviously we've worked with over the last number of years here in Ireland to put the reality that abortions are happening. They need to be provided for full choice, and that early abortion is so safe and needs to be made as easy to access as possible into the discussion. And we think in ROSA that those actions and highlighting that reality and some of the research done about access to women on web in Ireland, despite the 8th Amendment, despite it being illegal, that thousands of people are using this service, has played a huge part in the fact that not only are we celebrating that we've made history and we've won the repeal referendum, but in a few months you'll be able to go to your GP to access abortion care and to use the pills at home. So the service in the US has been going since April. It went public in that it was covered by some media outlets I think 2 weeks ago, and the requests have exploded. Huge numbers of people, and the stories are harrowing, and Rebecca really wants to obviously assist as many people in the US, but also she wants to assist the movement and to arm them with the best information, because it's not just in these states that are highlighted in the middle where, immediately if Roe v. Wade falls, abortion will be illegal, that people have difficulty accessing abortion services. It's actually everywhere. It's very young people, it's people who are struggling financially. The number of people emailing Aid Access who are saying they're working multiple jobs and they still can't pay their rent. It is really, really harrowing stuff. They've no health care, they've no access to support, is enormous. So this layer of people who have enormous difficulty accessing it, even now where it's allegedly legally allowed, are using the service, and there could be some really good research done into that could highlight the need for a movement that's fighting for abortion on the principle of bodily autonomy, on the basis of building a movement of ordinary people that ensures that there's access for ordinary people and not just some legal thing that says, well, because the current situation, if it's not an undue burden, whatever that means, then abortion restrictions are allowed, so they can bring in all kinds of things, which in reality are attacks to access and limit access, but because in a court they were able to say, oh well, this isn't an undue burden, then they were able to get it passed. The enormous potential in the movement in the US, I think we should be really encouraged by, but there's also difficulties because of the Supreme Court making this decision. There is a focus on the courts. There's a focus on legal changes and protections, And while obviously we should absolutely utilise, if there are Democrats who get elected, if there are independents, if there are anyone who says that they are pro-choice who get elected on the 6th of November, enormous pressure should come on them immediately to fight the anti-abortion attacks that have been brought in since Roe, to defend abortion rights, and to get, if necessary, abortion rights on the state legislature ASAP, because literally the Supreme Court could start hearing cases in a couple of months that could overturn Roe v. Wade very, very, very quickly. That's the reality of Kavanaugh's appointment. That's the reality of, obviously, if anything happened to any of the other Supreme Court justices, it's clear they will ram home anyone who's literally seen by everyone to be a sexual predator. They will still push them through no matter what, because they are so gung-ho on enforcing their social agenda at this time. So I just want to finish on a couple of, sorry, I always have my things spread out amongst multiple notebooks. So I just want to finish on a couple of examples. The personal stories that were shared at the first event that I went to covered every topic, and it is clear there is a massive politicisation, and there isn't an interest in just protecting your own situation. There's actually a really obvious instinct towards solidarity and building a mass movement and a broad opposition to what's going on. And it was really interesting. I was very irritated. I went to 3 kind of bigger cities while I was there, and literally like the day after I left that city or something, there was like a major trans solidarity protest. I was very annoyed I didn't get to go to any of them and show my solidarity, because it's actually quite politically understood by people that Trump is standing up and saying, I want to redefine gender, I want to do this, we need to punish women for that, blah, 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 in order to distract, in order to pull things the way he wants to, and to hoodwink people, including people who voted for him and people who maybe, echo the racist or the sexist things that he's saying. People understand that, and that actually, this isn't just someone who's horrible. This is a political plan to win, victories for the right, etc., and that it has the potential to work on a whole host of issues. And people want to get organised and to defeat that. I went to a meeting of the Democratic Socialists of America in Providence, and it was so young. It was like one of our meetings. It was teenagers, people in their 20s. And people were fascinated by what happened in Ireland. People were extremely interested. I was lucky enough to go to a socialist alternative meeting, and I got this lovely poster in just outside Boston. And young people in their droves are joining socialist organisations. They're joining left organisations. They want to build an opposition. Not only that saying we're opposed to this, we stand in solidarity with people who are being attacked, but that is consciously organising and saying we need to develop a plan to defeat this person, all that they stand for, and all of his thousands of copycats all over the place who are in different states, in different town councils, in different auspices around the place, pursuing that social agenda, and have been doing for years. It is not the case that under Trump everything changed. In reality, many of the anti-immigrant attacks, many of the anti-choice attacks were in the pipeline, were being brought in already in different states, and sometimes were very cleverly disguised by Obama himself. It was very interesting. I went to one meeting, which was like a forum hosted by the teachers union for school committee candidates. They were unbelievably horrified when I said, well, actually the church could just kind of decide who's on the board of management, that's how our schools are run. They were horrified at that. But this is a very interesting process, and I must say the skill in the doublespeak being used by the more conservative candidates is extreme. They're very good at what they do. I understand how people are hoodwinked to vote for these people. Obviously Irish politicians would do the same, but then at some random local forum they wouldn't be as good at it as they were in the States. The enemy is well organised there, and it's clear that there's a need for our co-thinkers to get well organised as well, and I think there's huge potential. And also I think we're going to be invited and asked to do many things in solidarity with the wonderful activists that I met in Rhode Island, and you may be asked to do a Skype introduction for a meeting or something in the next few weeks, because they're very inspired by what has happened in Ireland and think that it shows the way forward for them. So hopefully we'll be able to kind of be part of allowing that kind of organisation that's necessary to flourish in Rhode Island, and it could be an example across the states.